Hi, welcome to Art on the Brain. I'm Kelly Drake, and today I'm going to show you how to paint these 3 holiday cards with Daniel Smith luminescent paints. These are the basic colors I used: Indanthrone Blue, Ultramarine, Burnt Umber, Pyrrol Orange, and Aureolin. And then the luminescent colors, I used these 3 on all the cards: Iridescent Sapphire and Electric Blue, along with Interference Silver. There are a few other luminescent colors that I used, and those will be labeled down below. Here are the watercolor cards that I bought. They're Strathmore watercolor paper cards, and it's 140-pound cold press paper. And so I chose to take the outside front of the card and press it down on a board and go ahead and stretch that paper so that it doesn't buckle when I paint it. I use quite a bit of water, and so just painting this card without stretching it, I think, would not have the best result. So I have artist's or painter's tape. This is black tape from Blick that's 1/2 inch wide. And I went ahead and tore little pieces of tape to do all 4 corners first, just because the card won't lie down flat. And I want to get the tape on just right so that I have a perfect border around the whole thing, because that's going to stay white and that's going to be my nice white border around the card. So also trying to press it down really well so that when I do paint on it, the water and paint doesn't leak underneath. So now we're ready to just put water all over. I'm using a wash brush of any size, really, as long as it's big enough to cover real quick, and just making sure there's not pools of water on the card, but that it's shiny all over. So now I'm just going to let it dry, or dry it with a hair dryer. I do want to put this piece of tape right in the middle over the crease in the card so that I have a border all the way around the front of the card that matches. Okay, so we're going to start out with this card that I call the Star Tree. This is the simplest of the 3 cards we'll do today because it doesn't use masking fluid. So I'm starting out with Ultramarine Blue and just painting around the border, and then just putting plain water in the middle so that it bleeds into the center. And I like that irregular shape. I'm using a pencil to sketch my tree. You don't have to if you feel comfortable just painting it. I just like to do that sometimes to get the design and make sure that I'm ready to start painting. Okay, this is my nice small pointed number 10 sable brush. I'm using Indanthrone Blue and Burnt Umber and mixing it together to make this really nice dark indigo color. You may have indigo paint and that would work too. I just really like using a dark color that's not black. This allows me to mix the perfect dark that will blend with the colors behind it. I've made this nice dark indigo color, and I'm just going to go down with my detail brush and paint in my branches. I like them to kind of curve upward. It just kind of gives it a nice look. I don't like it to be perfectly uniform because I think it's more interesting to have it look more like a real tree that has longer branches, shorter branches, weird branches in between, and just to give it some character. Try to get it as dark as you can so that it looks like a silhouette. Also, if you're using any interference colors, they'll show up a lot better over the darker color. This is my interference green. I'm going to start with that. This is one of the extra colors I mentioned that'll be listed down below. And this is my tiny little detail brush. And as you can see, the interference green, it really shows up well on black. So sometimes I like to use these black to-go trays or sushi trays. So just taking a little bit of that green and putting garland on the tree basically in little tiny dots. So I'm just kind of going back and forth in a diagonal, starting to put a shimmery garland on there. This is Duochrome Cactus Flower. This is another one of the extra colors I mentioned. You can really use any of the iridescent or interference colors that you like. I'm just putting them on here to have a little variation in the garland. And at the end you'll see how they shimmer and how they show up against that dark color. This is one of my new favorite colors. It's this iridescent electric blue. What's nice about the iridescent colors as opposed to the interference colors is they show up even if they're not over a darker color. And it's a really nice bright blue. So I'm just filling in all the tiny little dots here, and when I'm done it'll look like a shimmery beaded garland. I also use this interference lilac, and I'm just kind of varying it between blues and different kinds of lilac and purple. Those are just some of my favorite colors. Also had a little bit of green in there, and so it's going to have just a pretty kind of analogous color scheme here with lots of cool colors. This lilac does warm it up just a little bit. So now that I put the finishing touches on my garland, I'm using iridescent silver, or wait, sorry, this is interference silver, and made a bright star and finishing up the garland with the silver. This silver is really a nice bright color. It almost substitutes for white in your watercolors. Now I'm going to use some of this iridescent sapphire and electric blue to put some stars in the background, and this will just be a really nice little shimmery addition to the card so that when you look at it and move it from side to side you can see it shimmer. It's also nice to have some texture back there, but with colors that are going to blend in with the background somewhat so they don't compete with the tree and the decorations. I'm just stripping off the tape carefully so it doesn't tear the paper, and as you can see it had a little bit of color bleed through, so blotted that out with clear water. And here's my finished card, the star tree. So you can see the shimmer as I move it back and forth in the light, and it makes a really, really pretty and festive card that you can give to your friends or relatives for the holidays. Our next card here is actually a really fun card to paint and only takes a minimal amount of masking fluid. And so first I just want to draw my little bird. Just doesn't have to be very detailed, just get the basic shape and kind of making the basic shapes of the trees here just so that I have my design in mind. Some of these lines might disappear in the paint. Now I'm getting my brush ready to use masking fluid. I always coat it with some soft soap, and I use an old brush, not a good brush, or a cheap craft brush to do this because masking fluid has a bad reputation for ruining brushes. And I'm just going to paint it on my little bird shape so that it protects it from the paint that I'm going to wash over the top. I want this area to stay white. Now I switched out for a tiny hobby brush and treated it the same way with the soft soap, and that helps protect even your old or hobby brushes just so that they don't get covered in masking fluid, and that will ruin them very quickly. So if you coat it with soap first and then put the masking fluid on, it washes off really well as long as you don't use it for an extraordinary long amount of time. So now I'm putting little dots all over the paper, over the trees, over the sky behind, and that's going to become my snow. I want it to leave this white, so it's the white of the paper, so when I rub it off at the end after I'm done painting, the snow will show through. So I'm starting out with a 1-inch wash brush and just putting on some Ultramarine Blue and getting the brush wet later on to lighten it toward the bottom of the page. So just dipping it in water. Now I have let it dry and coated my smaller, this is my number 10 sable pointed brush, round brush, and I'm using the the interference silver. my really nice bright silver to paint in the trees. And I want the snow to show as if it's going over the tree branches and the tree trunks, and so it's okay. I'm just going to paint it right over all that masking fluid, and at the end I'm going to rub it off and the snow will show through. So at this point my pencil lines don't show through perfectly, but at least it gave me a little bit of a start, and I'm just using my imagination at this point and making trunks so that they overlap each other and they're not perfectly straight, and make them look just like they do in the actual forest. Now I'm using my smaller detail brush to put in little branches and have them overlap again and kind of tangle, and just painting random branches in here and there so it looks somewhat natural. And the silver is going to show up a little or a lot depending on how much light is shining on it. And I like that for these holiday cards because, again, this card will really shimmer and have a festive feel to it when it's done. And this is a really simple way to do watercolor painting because you don't have to carefully paint all the layers. You can just go ahead and paint your wash on there and paint your trees right over the top, just as you would with acrylic. So now I've painted my trees on, testing to make sure it's all dry. And if you need it to dry faster, you can use a hairdryer. And you can see how that silver shimmers in the light as you move it back and forth. It's actually very, very beautiful. Now that it's dry, I'm just going to rub off all that masking fluid. And this is kind of a satisfying process to me. It's kind of fun to rub all that masking fluid off and see the white that's left over. And also, it's a wonderful way to paint snow and have it turn out so random and natural. Okay, now I just noticed that the shape of my bird isn't perfect, and which happens with masking fluid, that's okay. And so I'm just putting in a little bit of clear water here and there where I want to carve out that shape and blotting it out with some tissue or toilet paper. Just kind of perfecting that shape a little bit. I have a photo that I'm using of a red cardinal that's just scrap so that I can make sure it looks somewhat like a cardinal. We don't have cardinals around here where I live. And I want to try some of this Pyrrol orange. This is a new color I'm trying out, transparent Pyrrol orange. Hopefully I am pronouncing that right. Might be Pyrrol. And this is a beautiful orangey red. It's similar to cadmium red, but not as opaque, and maybe a little bit more orange. I think it's a really pretty color, and I'm going to mix it a little bit with that Aureolin, another color I'm probably mispronouncing, but it's a nice medium yellow. You could also use a cadmium yellow medium or light, and just to get that little bit of orange, lighter orange, lighter red that's on the bird. Now I'm mixing a darker red out of my Pyrrol orange and a little bit of burnt sienna, and that's going to put some shading on the bird so that you can see where the wing is and where the tail gets darker. Here I'm using my indigo mixture to go around the beak where the face is dark. And now just mixing a little bit of alizarin crimson in with my orangey red to darken it a little bit. Now I wanted that branch to go over the bird, and so once the bird dried, I put a little bit more of that interference silver right over the top. That's a nice thing about these interference paints and the luminescent paints in particular. You could just paint right over the top of other colors. Now again, had some of that paint leak through, so I'm blotting that out. The tape is not perfect. That's okay with me because I want it to look like a handmade card instead of something that I just bought from the store. I don't mind little things like that. So now just showing you how this shimmers and glows in the light and how it changes as you move it around. And that's my cardinal card. This last card I call City Lights at Christmas, and I put a Christmas tree in front of a dark city scene or a late night urban scene, and I enjoy painting these little buildings and skyscapes. Um, so I am just drawing a bunch of different rectangles at the bottom of the card. Some of them are overlapping, some are tall and skinny, some are short and fat, and just kind of having them come down in the middle to make room for that tree so that I can frame it a little bit. Now I just put a line there where I want the tree to go, and drawing in the branches. Again, you don't have to do this. You can just do it with your brush later if you feel comfortable with that. But now I do want to draw in the windows that I want to be lit up in the city. And so I'm drawing those in just kind of randomly, but so they have a nice design to them, because those are the things that are really going to show up, are these little windows. And now I'm I'm drawing in ornaments on the tree so that I can use my masking fluid to mask out these things, because these are the things that we want to paint lighter colors, but I want to do a blue wash over the top. So I want to keep the white of the paper, and so that I can paint these colors later on. So I treated my brush the same way as I did before with the soft soap, and I'm using the masking fluid to just mask out a star at the top of the tree, all the little ornaments, and the windows in the city that I want to be lit. So just finishing up here. I used a small craft brush, and I decided I want to put the moon in, so I used the cap of the masking fluid to draw a circle and draw in a crescent moon. I just thought that would be fun back there, and it kind of needed something in the sky so that it wasn't just blank back there. So masking that out too. Now I'm using a larger round brush, and this one is not labeled, but it's pretty big. It's almost as big as this number 30 round brush that I have. So it's probably a 26, 28, something like that. So I'm using the Ultramarine Blue and lightening it at the bottom. I added in a little darker paint at the top because I wanted that sky to get darker. And you don't want to do that if your paint has dried at all. You want to make sure that wash is still really wet when you do that. This is my number 10 round brush again. And I'm using some of that dark indigo that I mixed earlier with the Indanthrone Blue and burnt umber. And making sure it's nice and dark. And I'm going to paint in my Christmas tree. So I start out with a nice straight vertical line. And now I've got my number 8 flat brush. I actually decided I want to paint my city in first and then paint the tree over the top. So this little flat brush really makes the city easy to paint, because you can get those nice straight lines and just paint rectangle after rectangle so quickly and easily. I want this paint to be as dark as I can get it, so it looks like a silhouette and so all the lights show up. But it's okay if some buildings are darker or lighter than others, to give it a little bit of depth. So here I'm going to go over a couple buildings that I want to be darker, so that it looks like there's a little bit of depth there and some things are behind others. So now going back to my number 10 round brush and painting in the tree, just like I did the first tree that we painted earlier on the star tree card. And just making sure the branches are all a little bit different, that it's not perfectly symmetrical, and that it goes over the middle of the tree as well, not just on the left side or the right side. And making sure that I have the branches reach all those ornaments that I painted so that they look like they're hanging on something. And I went ahead and painted the tree over the top of the buildings too, just to make sure it's in there. It looks a little more natural, and got it as dark as I could. Now that it's dry, I'm going ahead and rubbing off all that masking fluid and leaving the white of the paper. I mix an orange with my Pyrrol orange and a little bit of that Aureolin yellow, and making some of the lit windows orange. Now, as you can see, I also painted some of the darker windows in with my 2 iridescent blues, and somehow missed that on the video, so I apologize for that. But using yellows and oranges to paint in the lit windows in the background so that it looks like someone's home. And now I'm going to use my bright iridescent silver and paint it around the moon and around the star. And I'm going to paint it around all the ornaments too, so that it looks like they're glowing. At first I had planned to paint these ornaments red, but once I painted the city lights and made them oranges and yellows, I didn't want the red to just cause too much confusion between all the different warm colors. I want something to really stand out. And so the tree, I figured if I use cool colors, iridescent colors, and don't use the real warm, bright colors with the basic paints, then it will stand out from the background. If I had painted this red, I think it would have just competed with the background. So here's that great electric blue, and I'm surrounding all the leftover ornaments with that. And now just using the 2 iridescent blues and making the stars in the background too, so that we also have that shimmery effect on this card that we did on the first card. I think that's just one really pretty little detail that you don't necessarily have to do, but when you do it, it just makes all the difference. When you take the card and move it back and forth in the light, the whole thing shimmers. And it's something that's maybe a little unexpected that I think the person that you give it to will really like when they see it. So you're taking the tape off very carefully and folding it down. Now when these cards fold, they don't tend to fold flat after you've stretched them out like this, so I put them under a couple books for a while and let them flatten out, and that'll keep them from popping open. And so you can see the shimmery effect of the stars in the background and all of the ornaments on the tree. So there you have 3 beautifully painted luminescent watercolor cards that you can send to your friends and family. And now don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and stop by and check out my webpage, my Facebook page, or take a look at my Instagram account if you'd like to learn more about me, my art, and my children's book illustrations.